Welcome to Texas Border Watch, your eyes on the front line for all things immigration, border security, and local policy. I'm Jordan Elder. We're going to start this week with the back and forth in El Paso. Most of the nation was probably just waking up when they heard that all airspace over El Paso was going to be shut down for 10 days. We have not seen a restriction like that since before 9/11, and officials at all levels of government essentially were panicking. They said they didn't know that this was going to happen, and they were trying to get to the bottom of what was going on. So this is a look at that restriction over El Paso. There was another one over here in New Mexico. And the significance of this is that means medical helicopters, search and rescue aircraft, and then civilian airlines couldn't take off or land in this area, which could have drastic impacts on public safety and all sorts of other things. So when everyone started looking into why this happened, there's a couple different narratives that emerged. So what we're now learning from federal officials is that Customs and Border Protection was wanting to test this anti-drone laser that they had gotten on loan from the Department of Defense, Department of War. Now, the idea of anti-drone, anti-cartel technology is not new. We know that the federal government has made significant investments in that over the course of the last few years. What was surprising is the lack of notice that something like that was going to happen. And what we're starting to hear from federal officials is they don't necessarily want their names out there because they want to share this information with the public, but they don't necessarily want it to kind of come back on their jobs. What they're saying is the plans to test this laser did not come with enough warning for aviation officials to make sure that members of the public were going to be okay and that they weren't going to be at risk. So they went ahead and shut down the airspace altogether just to be sure that that would be the case. We're also hearing that there was supposed to be a meeting about the laser later this month, but the Pentagon wanted to move up the testing timeline. So again, the FAA just moved in and said, you know what, to be safe, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put this restriction in place. CNN is reporting the laser was tested in more rural areas in recent weeks and actually ended up taking down some Mylar balloons as it was being tested. It's unclear if it has hit any potential cartel drones at this point. It's also unclear if during this restriction it ended up being tested and used over El Paso. But we're also seeing the White House say quickly after this happened that the airspace was shut down over cartel drones. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy tweeted out, the FAA and Department of War acted swiftly to address a cartel drone incursion. The threat has been neutralized, no danger to commercial travel. But we've been covering the border for years and years now. The officials who work here have been in this area for years. We've actually even told you on Texas Border Watch before, drones crossing over the U.S. border from Mexico is not new. It actually happens on an almost daily basis. We even brought you a hearing last year where a top official at DHS described just how often we're seeing these drone incursions. Here's a clip of that.
Malicious actors in our backyard and across the homeland are finding new ways to use drones to facilitate criminal activity. Nearly every day, transnational criminal organizations use drones to convey illicit narcotics and contraband across U.S. borders and to conduct hostile surveillance of law enforcement. In the last 6 months of 2024, over 27,000 drones were detected within 500 meters of the U.S. southern border, operating nearly 60,000 unique flights, the majority of which were conducted at night or at restricted altitudes. U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents and officers have seized thousands of pounds of narcotics, including enough fentanyl to kill tens of thousands of Americans. Across the globe, drones have also been used increasingly to conduct kinetic attacks. Warring cartel functions have attacked one another using drone-delivered explosives. And it's only a matter of time before Americans or law enforcement are targeted in the border region.
We also brought our questions about cartel drones, this laser, and this whole airspace fiasco to Victor Manjarrez, who is a former Border Patrol Chief Patrol agent, and right now he lives in this El Paso sector. So we want to show you a piece of that conversation.
You've obviously worked in this sector a really long time. Drone incursions are not a new phenomenon in this area, but also just on the border as a whole. Do they warrant a reaction like the one that we saw?
It is not a new phenomenon that it's current, but I will tell you in the last several months, the uptick of the use, it's gone up, is one. What I don't know yet is their use, because the uptick we've seen in places like here in El Paso, in Laredo, we've seen those. We see it quite a bit in the Tijuana, San Diego area. They're usually used for surveillance type capabilities. And so what I suspect happened now was maybe a drone or two, or maybe several over the last couple of weeks said, hey, this has really increased the frequency and maybe even the aggressiveness.
Have you ever seen a reaction like this to a drone incursion, fully shutting down the airspace?
I have not. This was pretty significant when you consider the aftermath of the September 11 terrorist attacks. It was much shorter. I think, if I remember correctly, it was 3 or 4 days international or nationally airspace was shut down. So when I saw 10 days, I go, man, that's pretty significant.
We've been hearing from officials from the mayor of El Paso all the way up to one of the lead administrators at TSA that they did not know that this was coming, or if they did, they learned about it after the restriction was already in place. Why is it important for agencies at all of those levels to know and understand when something like this happens?
Well, and that is, I think, a significant error or a critical departure. What is usually standard practice is when the FAA is going to make a decision like that, it's very impactful. Not only the federal agencies or in local agencies, but the region itself. You know, we say, well, the El Paso area. Well, El Paso, West Texas, it's really the biggest transportation hub for flights in immediate area. Everywhere else, you got to travel about 5 hours in a car to do that. And so when you do that, again, you look at impact. You know, how does it impact TSA? How does it impact uh, something like UPS and FedEx that fly out of El Paso? There's an economic impact because we live in a society of kind of point of sale inventory. You know, someone gets scanned, something's getting shipped off. So it could have a significant economic impact if you don't coordinate that. And it doesn't sound like that, right? I think like everyone else, we saw the news that came out, you know, sometime at 10:30, 11:30 last night, and that simply is not the way to do business.
There are reports right now that this was a disagreement over drone tests. Politico and the Associated Press are all reporting the Defense Department was using drones and testing counter drone technologies, including a high energy laser. And they're saying the FAA knew that this was happening, but they didn't have all the details. So then they put this restriction in. What do you make of that?
It could have, but it sounds a really good case of poor communication, right? On the when there's a decision to control that airspace, and that's FAA. It's make no mistake, it's FAA. Is you can't make a decision in that vacuum without getting all that information because it isn't like a 10-hour restriction, right? It was, or even a 10-minute restriction. It's a 10-day restriction. And that again, it just sounds like the communication was very poor if they had any.
One of the things in researching this that I found that I thought was kind of interesting is the National Defense Authorization Act that went into effect late last year has a pretty big section on drones and on counter drone technologies. It's something that the United States is really starting to invest in and making sure law enforcement agencies can take down drones. Based on what you've seen at the border, specifically in that area, what impact will that have to make that investment and really start looking into how do we counter these drones that sometimes are coming into our airspace every day?
Well, I think that it's pretty significant, or it can have a significant impact because we think of drones, you know, something that you can go down to department store, order online on Amazon and get that. But these type of aircraft, they'll go way beyond that. You know, there used to be the idea of ultralights that was actually manned by a single individual that would fly on that. You know, how would you bring those down safely on that? How do you get the unmanned, like these drones? How do you bring them down safely? The easy thing is, and I've seen comments, right? Hey, the drones, let's shoot them down. Well, they got to land somewhere. And we're talking a pretty populous area, downtown urban area. And you start bringing, you know, things that weigh pretty considerable weight crashing down. Well, that's a problem on that. In fact, that solution might be worse than the actual problem on that. And so there are methods that's being developed in the last several years. How do you bring those down safely on that? They haven't quite mastered that because I think we've struggled, like most nations. Drones are generally used in a military type scenario. And now we're looking at this more of a law enforcement, even national security scenario, kind of the civilian side stuff. So how do you protect the airspace? How do you bring down those safely? by protecting the population that's underneath those. And I think that's going to be the struggle for the next couple of years.
It's still unclear if that laser was actually tested and used while the airspace was closed, so we're waiting to hear more from federal officials on that. When we talked to Manjarrez, he also brought up concerns about the laser being used over a place like El Paso, because when you're shooting down these drones, you don't always know when they're going to land. So he says that's a question that he would like to see answered if use of this laser continues. And again, we don't have a ton of details yet about what it looks like, how powerful it is. And then again, officials are saying today that it is on loan from the Department of Defense for Customs and Border Protection. The Department of Homeland Security is making really significant investments in anti-drone technology. They've actually opened a whole office to address this problem just in the last few months. So this is something that we'll continue to follow. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has now issued a disaster declaration over the New World screwworm. If you don't remember this frightening picture, this is the fly and larva that eats flesh and poses huge risks to the cattle population, not just in Texas, but in America. We've seen outbreaks of this before, and it was absolutely devastating. So some of the new developments this week, sterile flies are being dropped all over South America and Central America so that the sterile flies can go mate with infected flies, and it makes it so that that larva doesn't end up developing, keeps the cattle safe. So the new announcement this week is the sterile flies are going to be dropped in Texas for the first time. They're extending the zone 50 miles into southeast Texas. Now, keep in mind, New World screwworm has not reached our state yet. Officials are just doing this to make sure that it stays that way. We've been seeing more cases moving up further north in Mexico, so this is just a precautionary measure. We also heard from Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins this week. She was in Edinburgh at Moore Air Base, opening up a new facility that's going to create these sterile flies, hoping to keep the New World screwworm out of the United States. So here are some of her comments and some of the other officials that were there that day.
This facility will be a critical part of our overall efforts to combat the New World screwworm, allowing USDA to disperse sterile flies more readily in northern Mexico and here in the southern United States. As of last week, we moved the sterile fly dispersal area, also known as the polygon, north, so we can preemptively drop sterile flies in Texas. Again, this is a first time to do that, to continue to work to stop the threat before it reaches our border. Sterile insects are the most important tool, but USDA's import requirements and protocols add another line of defense. Just last week, the importance of those protocols was highlighted when a horse from Argentina was presented at an equine import quarantine facility in Florida. Upon examination, the great USDA APHIS team there identified an open wound with larvae on the animal, promptly collected and shipped the samples to our National Veterinary Services Laboratory in Iowa, and there they confirmed within a few hours that the larvae were indeed New World screwworm. The horse was immediately treated with medication to kill any larva in accordance with standard import protocols and was only released after the treatment was completed. The animal was re-examined and determined to be free of screwworm. Because of this swift detection and stringent protocols, New World screwworm did not spread into the United States. I want to reiterate that there is no New World screwworm currently in our country. As part of our effort to keep this pest out of our nation and far from our ranches, we maintain a large network of validated traps along our border, ensuring we will find and quickly eradicate if it does come north. Every day we are finding plenty of other kinds of flies. So far we have trapped and tested 42,000 flies just here in Texas alone since June of last year, but none of them have tested to be the New World screwworm. If the screwworm does indeed cross our border, we will immediately, within hours, notify our state and industry partners once confirmed and ensure that the general public will simultaneously activating our New World screwworm playbook, which many of you have played such an important part in writing and updated, and we are so grateful for that. That is on our website, by the way, screwworm.gov.
We know that the state that is most in the direct path of the screwworm is the state of Texas, and that's why we as a state have taken it so serious. I'm proud that we have partners of mine in the state legislature, in both the House and Senate, that have been talking to me about it because they've been dealing with their constituents on the front line of dealing with this issue. We have, because we saw the approach getting closer and closer and closer, because we did not want to have to deal with this after it arrived here, but wanted to deal with it before it got here, I issued a statewide disaster declaration for the New World Screwworm to galvanize all of our state resources to combat the spread of the New World Screwworm fly into the state of Texas. We're doing this because of what we know it means to the beef industry here in the state of Texas. Listen, Texas ranks #1 for cattle, among other #1 rankings. And this is very important to the cattle industry, very important to the restaurant industry, to the grocery store industry, very important to families who put it on the table every night. And we wanted to make sure that we put together the resources necessary for Texas to provide a Texas-sized response to this.
Several top U.S. officials testified this week in front of the House Homeland Security Committee, and that includes CBP Commissioner Rodney Scott. He defended the border security and immigration enforcement strategies that we've seen implemented across the United States and answered some questions from members of Congress about the strategy moving forward. Here's a piece of that.
We have now implemented effective policies, established unified priorities and objectives across all federal departments, and empowered our workforce to do their jobs by simply enforcing the laws that already exist. We have imposed consequences for those who break our laws, the laws that this body enacted. And today, the United States, because of these efforts, enjoys the most secure border in our nation's history. But this progress did not happen by accident. It's a result of a comprehensive approach to border security. We ended catch and release, we prioritized detention and removal authorities, and we sent a clear message that illegal entry into the United States will not be tolerated. And the numbers speak for themselves. We have achieved record low illegal crossings between ports of entry. Border Patrol apprehensions along the southwest border totaled over 90,000 for the entire year. That's a number that used to represent a single month under the Biden administration. Daily encounters have dropped by 95%, averaging about 250 per day, compared to 5,000 a day during the Biden administration. Our increased enforcement also resulted in the seizure of over 617,000 pounds of illicit narcotics. That's nationwide, an 8% increase over the prior year. This included nearly 11,000 pounds of fentanyl and more than 186,000 pounds of methamphetamines. This is what having a secure border looks like. Since January 2025, CBP is building smart wall at record levels. We're installing high-tech attributes where the Biden administration had shut it off. We're installing water barriers along the Rio Grande River, which denies criminals access to these routes. But that is not all. We're investing in technology at our ports of entry, non-intrusive inspection equipment, biometrics, and advanced surveillance to improve our ability to know what's coming into this country, the land, air, and sea, at and between the ports of entry.
That's all for this week's Texas Border Watch. You can read more in depth on any of these stories over on our websites, news4sanantonio.com and foxsanantonio.com. And if you have any questions or any requests for topics, feel free to reach out to us. This is my handle on social media right there, and feel free to let us know. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week.